As a movie fan, I don't know if there's any better feeling than walking into a theater for a film you've been waiting to see forever. Just walking through those doors is enough to fill you with excitement as the smell of fresh buttery popcorn fills the air, and don't even get me started on the indescribable feeling when the lights begin to dim. It's almost like heartbreak feels good in a place. Okay, sorry. But as someone who truly loves going to the theater, I can't even imagine a world where we don't have that opportunity. But back in 2021, that was almost the case. Now, I don't know if anyone remembers this thing from a few years ago called COVID-19, but it kind of had the world in shutdown mode for a minute. Among a few other things, the pandemic meant that new movies were either being released straight to streaming so you could watch them at home, or just pushed back until the pandemic eased up. And unfortunately, when a business's whole model is stuffing a bunch of people next to each other in a small, semi-sticky room, adjusting to a world of social distancing is gonna be tricky. And tricky it was. From 2020 to 2021, every major movie theater chain suffered billions of dollars in losses. And with how long it felt like the pandemic was gonna last, it seemed like movie theaters as we knew them weren't gonna survive. That was until one fateful month, where a bunch of people stuck at home with nothing but time on their hands decided they wanted to make history.
And that's what this is.
And make a meme out of the stock market, inadvertently saving the movie theater industry in the process. Our story starts back in 2019, when Reddit user DeepFuckingValue, also known as Roaring Kitty, purchased $53,000 of GameStop stock and started posting about its performance on the subreddit r/WallStreetBets. Now, even back then, GameStop wasn't really a company people had confidence in, since physical games were already kind of a dead medium, so people originally mocked Kitty for his purchase. I mean, how was investing in GameStop, the store nobody but Pop Funko collectors go to anymore,
Dilbert from Hocus Pocus 2,
a smart choice? They kept telling him that he should just sell and cut his losses, but he never listened. See, Kitty had been doing extended research on the stock, and he believed that it was being criminally overshorted by hedge funds. Now, hearing that, you're probably saying, "TheAntiCritic.
What'd that mean?
Now, I'm gonna try my best to keep this explanation as simple as possible, because honestly, I can barely wrap my head around it myself, but here goes. Overshorted is a term used for a stock large investment groups are betting on to fail, kinda like gambling on a loser instead of a winner. How this works is these groups, or hedge funds, can legally borrow and use huge amounts of stocks from a broker, usually ones that already aren't doing well. In return, they have to pay the broker a fee and promise the stocks will be returned, since again, they're not buying new stocks, they're just borrowing other people's. So once they've borrowed enough stocks, the hedge funds will just sell them. But how are they able to sell stocks that they promised to return? I hear you ask. And that's where their game comes in. See, when big sells like this happen, yes, the person selling will make a lot of money, but the market will also be flooded with all of those shares all at once. Remember supply and demand? Supply goes up, demand goes down. So when there's a lot of stocks suddenly made available without a high demand for them, the price will almost surely drop to reflect that. So what the hedge funds are doing is basically artificially lowering the price of a stock they just sold, and then just buying back what they need to return at a much lower price. Then just pocketing the difference. So in the end, hedge funds are making a profit off borrowing, selling, and buying back the exact same number of stocks. Are you still with me? Good! I also linked a video in the description that definitely explains it better than I just did, just in case. Now back to the story. So as Roaring Kitty kept posting on Wall Street Bets, more and more people started looking into what he was calling out. And the more people that did, the angrier they got. I mean, these hedge funds were basically killing a company that was already hanging on by a thread just so they can make more money? That's not very nice of them.
It's not nice to do that!
That's when talks of the big squeeze started. An organized effort to buy huge amounts of GameStop stocks and hold them for as long as possible, basically becoming an anti-hedge fund. Buying and holding a stock like that will cause its price to rise. Again, supply and demand. This meant that any attempt from hedge funds to lower GameStop's price would be wiped out by the sudden demand for the stock. Hedge funds would lose millions and millions of dollars when they try to buy back what they sold during a short, while the Wall Street Bets community watched their investments skyrocket. Because of the pandemic, more people were getting into stock trading throughout 2020 than ever before. And with how big the Wall Street Bets community was getting, the squeeze really started to catch on. I mean, it's not every day you get to save a dying company and fuck over billionaires. Like, how funny would that be? So in January 2021, it began. From January 1st to January 28th, GameStop stock shot up in price by over 2,000%, from $17.25 to over $450. That's crazy! At this point, the squeeze had gone mega viral across Reddit, even getting attention from the mainstream media, leading GameStop to be dubbed the first ever meme stock. Over the next few months, multiple hedge funds lost billions of dollars since they were forced to buy shares at a price they never expected. One called Melvin Capital ended up closing, and GameStop was at its highest market price ever. The squeeze was an astounding success. So, the victorious Redditor said,
"Let's do that again!"
And that's where AMC comes in. You see, the pandemic wasn't the only reason that AMC was in such a rough spot throughout 2020. Before COVID hit, the theater giant had undergone nationwide expansion efforts, like building new theaters and remodeling old ones to add those, beautiful leather recliners. This effort, combined with them recently acquiring 2 competing theater chains, was not cheap, and led the company's debt to get quite high. However, as any company that size would, they figured that investing in themselves would pay off in more profits, so all would be okay in the end. Except the world shut down and that didn't happen. So when company profits suddenly sank to 0, AMC was left in a pretty bad spot. In October of 2020, AMC spokespeople sent out a warning to shareholders that unless the company was able to find additional revenue, they would have to file for bankruptcy. This announcement only caused stock prices to drop even further, making it a very attractive stock to short, ultimately leading it to be one of the most shorted stocks on the market in the beginning of 2021. All of these elements combined meant that if something didn't happen soon, AMC was done for, and a large chunk of the movie theater industry along with it. So when the second squeeze began in the later half of January 2021, and hashtag SaveAMC was trending on Twitter, it felt like a guardian angel was sent from the heavens specifically to make sure that we could see Madame Web in theaters. Almost exactly as it happened with GameStop, AMC stock raised from around $9 in the beginning of 2021 to around $90 by January 28th. Once again, a massively successful squeeze. Now, notice how I keep mentioning January 28th? That's not just because the stock prices for GameStop and AMC peaked that day. It's also the day the hedge funds tried to fight back. On that day, multiple brokerage firms like Robinhood halted any purchase of GameStop and AMC stocks, claiming they couldn't afford to process the massive number of trades coming in. The freeze caused stock prices to plunge and left people who invested with 2 options: sell now and cut your losses, or hold it in hopes they go back up. But of course, the Wall Street Bets community took this as a challenge. Figuring that Robinhood was just trying to bail out the hedge funds that fund it, they simply continued to hold their stocks. The outrage from the community attracted mainstream media and government attention, so after about a week of the halt, it was finally lifted. Billionaire investors took the fattest L of their lives, and the community had won again. Because of this, AMC stock price continued to climb, and the company was able to pay off massive amounts of debt that in any other world would have meant certain doom for the company. I just think it's such an amazing story that one guy buying $53,000 of GameStop stock ultimately led to wealthy investors losing billions of dollars. It's just like the amount of crazy factors that had to line up for this is insane. Think about it. AMC had to have been in massive debt for it to become an overshorted stock. Then, a global pandemic had to happen to get more people into stock trading and on Wall Street bets. Then the first squeeze of GameStop had to be a success for people to want to do it again. And on top of that, the squeeze had to be successful enough so that enough people knew about it to speak out against Robinhood halting trades. Like, honestly, if anything can be considered a miracle, I feel like this is up there. Because of someone named Roaring Kitty, we're still able to smell that buttery popcorn, walk on that semi-sticky floor, and experience that indescribable feeling when the lights begin to dim. Every single star perfectly lined up for a meme to save the movie theater industry. I know this video was a bit more information heavy than my last few, but I just really love this story and feel like more people should know about it. That's all I have for you today, so please consider leaving a like on this video, and maybe even subscribing if you're into that. Thanks so much for watching, and remember to stay anti-critical.